The following podcast is entirely a work of fan fiction. It is unofficial, unaffiliated, and unauthorised. Neither the podcast nor any individual involved in its production is now, nor has ever been, in any way associated with HBO, Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin, or the Song of Ice and Fire book series. The podcast was, is now, and shall always be entirely without profit. Neither the podcast directly, nor its makers indirectly, generate or receive any form of revenue or financial restitution that might otherwise accrue to the rightful copyright holders. The following podcast is entirely a work of fan fiction. We hope you enjoy it.
Aerys Targaryen watches from the window as the city burns. Stone and brick, wood and thatch. The fire swallows it all like a great roaring beast, impossible to satiate, impossible to tame. The scene below shimmers and bends, the heat so overpowering that even the lines and angles of the city's geometry appear as though melting away into madness. Aerys turns his back, his creeping sense of confusion salved somewhat by the familiar tranquility of his throne room. The peace so palpable, the king can feel its sensuous, soft caress upon his skin. Silent as snowfall, a long, lithe shadow slips past, only inches beyond his reach, the sharp metallic scent of blood trailing in its wake. Aerys feels the first cold fingers of fear scratching at his heart. He takes a step into the silent chamber. 100 colours dance upon the floor to illuminate his approach. The fires without climbing so high now as to lick at the stained glass window that frames the iron throne. The king stops, stone still, like prey before a predator. The shadow prowls back and forth before the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. Their eyes meet, and as Aerys looks into the gold-green stones studded into the shadow's umbra, the fringes of the darkness begin to ossify into familiar shapes. A muscled haunch, a long and lustrous mane, 2 pairs of powerful paws tipped with ice-white claws, sharper than swords. The lion turns its head disdainfully away from the small, shaking man in the soiled crimson robes, and in one graceful pounce mounts the Iron Throne. The light filtering in from the world outside has turned a dazzling white, bathing the beast in a bleached brightness that pains Aerys to look upon. Aerys feels the anger rising from his insides, an anger so great it's like to lodge in his throat and choke him upon his own outrage. He raises his hand, levelling an accusatory finger at the golden-maned usurper, and then he sees the flames. The fire has penetrated the stout stone walls of the Red Keep, riding his back from the window like burrs from a briar. It strips his robes away in seconds, covering his skin in an orange-red cloak of dancing, cavorting, frolicking flame. Aerys lurches upright, sending his wineglass skittering from the side table.
Your Grace, is everything all right, Your Grace?
I'm fine, Sir Oswell. Everything's fine.
Aerys crosses to his bed. With one hand on the covers, he hesitates, the memories of his dream rearing up before his bloodshot eyes like phantoms.
Your Grace?
Fetch me a girl.
Your Grace,
A different girl from last time. I don't like them marked.
Oswell hesitates, not at all comfortable with the command, but compelled by duty to hold his tongue.
But make sure she's blonde. Always blonde.
Tywin and Cersei Lannister sit at a table, breaking their fast, the king's hand idly perusing a stack of papers as he eats.
I'll see that this morning's meeting of the small council concludes as close to noon as I'm able. You know where you need to be?
Unless it's changed since the last 6 times of asking.
Tywin casts a pointed glare at Cersei's attire, a figure-hugging gown of red and black silk, her shoulders and arms bare, but for a layer of fine Myrish lace.
What are you wearing?
Cersei smiles and runs a hand down the shimmering bodice.
Do you like it? I had it made after our welcome banquet. It's the same...
Prince Rhaegar likes his women in green.
Cersei rolls her eyes in exasperation.
Fine. I'll change after I've eaten.
Cersei returns to her breakfast, but Tywin remains immutable as stone until she senses his attention. Sighing, she sets down her spoon and leaves the table, passing Jaime as he enters.
Good morning, sister. You haven't finished your breakfast.
I have to change.
But I like you just the way you are.
Jaime is in too good a mood to be put out by the irritated wave of dismissal he receives in reply. A servant approaches.
Bring me 2 of everything you have. I find I have a hearty appetite this morning.
We've already had a minstrel at the door begging coppers to play his latest composition. 6 white knights, 1 golden lion cub, I believe he called it.
You paid him handsomely, I trust? It's not every day your eldest son and heir is anointed a knight.
Knighthoods must come easier than back-alley slatterns these days if stumbling blindly into a trap set by a rabble of peasants with scavenged steel is deemed deserving of the honour.
2 of the rabble were knights of the realm themselves, I might add, though I fear that fact aids your point more than it does mine.
You may as well have fought a pair of straw-stuffed practice targets. I imagine slaying those self-styled brigands amounted to very much the same.
It didn't feel the same at all, actually.
Tywin takes note of Jaime's change in tone and adopts a note of scornful impatience to his manner.
I wasn't much older than you are now when I killed my first man, and I can assure you I did not have 6 of the 7 White Cloaks to do the rest of my fighting for me.
Did you have a father that couldn't muster so much as a kind word towards your accomplishments?
I had a father with no discernible accomplishments of his own from which he might take illustration. For better or worse, you have a father that does, which you do well to remember the next time you care to flaunt your errors in judgment as though they were victories. Only jugglers and singers require applause. The bar for acclaim is commensurately higher when you're a Lannister of Casterly Rock.
Tywin stands, gathers his papers, and strides from the room. Jaime lowers his fork, his appetite as ruined as his mood. A second servant approaches, with a silver tray bearing a wax-sealed scroll.
He just left. You can still catch him if you hurry.
Apologies, my lord, but the scroll is meant for you.
A surprised Jaime takes the rolled parchment, furrowing his brow at the sight of the Targaryen seal upon the wax. In a narrow passageway of bare wooden boards between 2 interior walls, Illyrio sits precariously upon a stool, his ample rump spilling over all sides of the seat. The cramped quarters spare him little room to manoeuvre, but he somehow succeeds in bending forward low enough that his gaze aligns with the 2 tiny eye holes bored into the wall. Retrieving a peach from a full bowl between his feet, he settles in to watch. On the other side, Master of Ships Lucerys Valerion lies upon a 4-poster bed in post-coital lassitude, 2 of Illyrio's girls coiled, naked and languorous about either flank.
I see now why they call you the sea snake.
A different Valerion, my sweet.
So what do they call you, if not the sea snake?
The sea slug, the landed snake, the lord of port. Bastard.
But how can you be a bastard if your name is Valerion?
It's not a terribly interesting story, I promise you.
Nerissa raises the tangle of covers spread haphazardly over Lucerys's middle.
I'd say we have a few minutes, wouldn't you, Mal?
Lucerys grins and extricates his arms from behind Melini's neck.
Very well. Fetch me a cup of wine to parch my thirst.
Melini does as she's bid, Lucerys watching her olive-skinned body move lithely across the room.
People name me bastard because that's precisely what I am. I was born a byblow of Lord Rickard Valerion, Lord of Driftmark, Master of the Tides, and last of his great and noble line. His efforts at siring a child upon his lady wife had all ended in failure, and so for a time I was raised as the apple of my father's eye and presumptive heir to Driftmark. When Lady Talia died delivering her 5th stillborn son, Lord Arestes found himself a new wife. And soon thereafter she birthed my half-brother Emmonds. With a young and pliable girl in his bed and a true-born son in his nursery, my father had no more use for my mother and I. Before the moon turned, we were cast out, discarded, and forgotten.
Nerissa strokes Lucerys's cheek, pressing her lips to his bare chest tenderly.
What a cruel thing to happen, my poor, poor little lord.
Melini returns with Lucerys's wine and curls up beside him.
Without a copper to my name, I was forced to draw upon the one gift of my father's I still possessed. See, I found work on a merchant ship sailing out of Bentos, but the gods had other plans, and on the return voyage we were overtaken by a band of privateers and taken as slaves to be sold in Volantis.
How awful!
It could have been, had I failed to impress my captors during the storms that would have sunk us 3 times over, was it not for my efforts. The captain fell overboard and drowned the first night, his first mate the second, and so it fell to me to keep us afloat and steer us through the squalls. When we finally reached Volantis, the Pentoshi crew were taken to the market, and I was given a ship of my own in the privateer's fleet.
Wait, so you were a pirate before you were a lord?
Not a pirate, a privateer.
What's the difference?
What's the difference between a brothel and a pillow house?
You'll find your answer soon enough when Magister Illyrio presents you the price for our company today.
Masters of the small council don't pay for their pleasures, silly girl.
Oh, we pay, just not in coin, and not to an up-jump cheese lord playing at flesh peddler.
Then how do you pay?
Patience, sweetling. We're almost there. So after a few years, making my fortune at sea, I found myself by one fashion and another in command of the entire fleet. Not long after I received my command, word reached me that my father had been killed on the shores of the Stepstones, sunk by Melis's motley band of whoresons. The 7 Kingdoms was at war, and found itself without a master of ships.
What about your half-brother?
Still an infant, barely out of swaddling clothes, and in no position to assume my father's duties. And thus it was I received my unexpected summons. Tywin Lannister, eldest son of Lord Titus Lannister of Castle Rock, had convinced his good friend Prince Aerys that his father needed a captain that knew the Stepstones intimately, but the rules of honourable engagement only in passing. Run the last remnants of Melis's fleet to ground, Tywin told me, and I will see to it that you are granted that which your father refused you. I will name you Valerion.
He could do that?
Not at the time, no. But once Aerys was king and named Tywin Hand, there was very little he couldn't do. In truth, the war was all but won after the young lion's famous trick on Bloodstone, but the prince was determined not to make his forebears' mistake, and resolved to extinguish the black fire flame once and for all. We spent 2 weeks flushing out the last of the rebels from among the Stepstones, and another 2 chasing them across the summer sea. Once we had them under tow, we tied their crews to the decks and burned the ships to cinders. Before the year was out, Aerys was king, Tywin was hand, and I was Lord Lucerys Valerion, master of ships.
That's quite the happy ending, my lord.
Nerissa raises the covers once more, sliding a hand down between Lucerys's legs.
And not before time, by the look of things.
Wait, I want to hear the rest. You must have more adventures to tell.
Lucerys breaks away from Nerissa's lips, only long enough to disappoint Melini.
You would think so, wouldn't you? 20 years in command of the King's Navy.
Lucerys trails away as Nerissa directs her kisses southward. Melini pulls at his arm.
There must be more, my lord. You cannot whet a girl's appetites like that and then leave her unsatisfied.
Lucerys opens his eyes to regard Melini suspiciously.
I've never met a whore so interested in anything but coin. Where did you say Illyrio found you?
Behind the walls, Illyrio's jaw stops mid-mastication as he silently curses his agent's heavy-handedness. Nerissa stops her ministrations to look up at Lucerys with innocent eyes.
Do you know Loreth well, my lord?
Not as well as I might, perhaps.
Surely a man so experienced at sea knows the free cities like the back of his own hand.
Illyrio bobs his head in appreciation. He has taught his girls well, Nerissa and Melini redirecting Lucerys by pricking at his pride as a sailor.
I have not set foot on a ship at sea since I took my seat.
He loses his train of thought for a moment as Nerissa returns to her work.
My seat in the council. Tywin prefers his dogs to be on a short leash. Besides, girl, it's not your satisfaction I'm here for. I was told you ladies were trained in the way of the 7 sighs. By my count, I've yet to sample more than 4.
Melini allows Lucerys to push her head down to join Nerissa. He leans back, letting his empty wine cup roll away across the bed. Between the walls, Illyrio sucks the last shreds of flesh from the pit of his peach and reaches for another, sticky juices and a satisfied smile upon his lips. Rhaegar enters his father's solar to discover Aerys in hushed conference with his Master of Whispers.
Good morning, father. I trust you slept well.
Aerys searches his son's words for sarcasm, then turns back to pouring himself a cup of wine.
Varys tells me you intend on pursuing an agenda of your own in council today.
Did he now?
Varys raises his palms and half shrugs in silent apology.
I called you home to curtail Tywin's presumptions in council, just as I called Varys from Pentos to do the same. One of you, at least, has not forgotten his purpose.
And did Varys also tell you, as I told him, that I have greater ambitions in council than merely performing as your puppet in this interminable feud?
Ambitions, eh?
Aerys considers the prince for a moment, then takes a seat before the hearth.
I had ambitions once. I was going to bring water to the deserts of Dawn. I was going to build a colossus large enough to crush the Titan of Bravos beneath his heel. I presume yours are similarly grand, to make them your priority ahead of your father's command?
Rhaegar sits himself across from his father.
The Night's Watch has patrolled the northernmost border of the realm for 8,000 years, but as you well know, the Watch has been permitted to decline into a perilous state.
The Watch is a northern problem for the northern houses to resolve. When a wildling army threatens King's Landing, then perhaps we might consider it ours.
Their armories are woefully understocked, and what steel they do possess is either rusted red or so old it's like to shatter upon first use. They depend entirely upon the northern houses to replace their livestock, and what meat they butcher must go directly to feed the brothers today and cannot be added to their already meagre stores for tomorrow. Though they hold the lands of the gift, they lack the provisions for planting and the manpower for harvesting. Their ranks are thinner than they've ever been, with manpower enough to garrison just 3 of their 17 forts. 3 forts against 100 leagues of unguarded wall. The forests to the north have encroached so close that wildling raiders looking to scale the wall can climb a third its height before even setting foot upon the ice.
Your ambition is that we send livestock and lumberjacks to the wall?
I would have us send men capable of performing any one of the 1,000 other essential tasks that are currently going undone.
I have never sent those begging crows away without first giving them the pick of my dungeons.
It's all very well sending those that have chosen the black over the hangman's noose, but the wall is only as strong as the men defending it. We must also send knights and officers, as well as a quota from the highborn. Those who can read as readily as they can sit a horse, men trained at arms and schooled in military strategy.
Do you know many such men eager to trade the comforts of home for a life of frozen celibacy, teaching murderers and rapists their letters?
I do not, which is why we must provide incentive. I propose we establish a standing army, paid by and loyal to the crown, with a hide of land for officers in exchange for a 20-year term of service. There's a clear path in life for firstborn sons, but what about the spares? How many of those that drift into service among the septons, or the maesters, or selling their sword overseas would gladly seize the opportunity to carve their own little kingdom out from under the shadow of their father's heir?
And where is this land going to come from?
From the gift. Hundreds of thousands of empty acres. I mean to use the land to construct a second wall of stone and mortar, running from one coast to the other, with a fort every quarter league and every fort under the command of a captain drawn from this new officer class.
A legion of petty lords armed and organized along our northern border. Have I really raised such a fool?
We've been at peace so long there's barely a few thousand men in the whole realm with anything resembling combat experience. If we mean to properly prepare for future conflicts, the days of shoving swords into the hands of farmers and fishermen must come to an end. We need professional soldiers, well-drilled and ably skilled.
What future conflicts? I ended the Blackfire line with my own 2 hands 20 years ago.
You know precisely which conflict.
Aerys's face darkens.
Don't start with this nonsense again, Rhaegar. Do you hear me? I won't stand for it.
Rhaegar's eyes flit to Varys, as though only just recalling the silent eunuch's presence.
I'm not sure why you're still here, Lord Varys, but if you're waiting to be excused, you need wait no longer.
Varys looks to Aerys. After a moment's pause, Aerys waves a hand in dismissal.
Your Grace. Your Grace.
Have you forgotten the promise you made to grandfather? The promise every Targaryen king has made to his forebears since the age of Aegon the Conqueror. You have a responsibility.
I'll hear no lectures from you on responsibility. While you were off chasing ancient scratchings across the narrow sea, I was here, at home, ruling the 7 kingdoms.
You may reign, father, but it's Tywin Lannister that rules.
Careful, Prince Rhaegar.
That's exactly what I'm trying to be, father. Since we fled before the doom of Old Valyria, the Targaryen line has been readying itself for the war to come.
You do well to remember to whom you're speaking. All you know of prophecy is what you've read in moth-eaten scrolls, but I have lived with prophecy and the madness it brings to the men in our family all my life. When I was 16 years old, my father forced me to wed your mother on the word of a woods witch. When I was 19, I watched my grandfather burn himself alive trying to wake dragons from stone, the dreams that have plagued me since.
Aerys cuts himself off. He rises and returns to the dresser.
Go on.
It makes no matter.
What were you about to say?
Enough, Rhaegar.
Father, please, if you would just...
I said enough! I will not hear another word about prophecy, not one more. Do you hear me? I forbid you to take this absurd business before council. I called you home to curb Tywin and his lickspittles, not make yourself one of them. No son of mine will go crawling before that man with begging bowl in hand.
The needs of the realm are more important than your pride, or mine for that matter. Ever since I found Aemon's notes in the library, he and I have been writing to one another.
Aemon? So that's where your sudden concern for the Night's Watch comes from, is it?
If you only knew the things he's uncovered, the things he sent me searching for were...
If you were still a child, I would confiscate your ink and parchment, but you are a man grown, and I cannot keep you from indulging the old fool in his fantasies, but I can keep you from shaming your father and your house by giving our enemies any more cause to whisper about madness in the Targaryen blood.
Aerys drains his cup. He sighs, his blood cooling and his composure gathering. He looks to his son, his anger replaced by something more melancholic.
What happened to you, boy? When your grandfather died and freed you from his coddling, I thought you had finally turned a corner. You set aside your books in favour of a sword, and I thought you on your way to becoming a warrior like your old man. I saw so much of myself in you then. I'd look at you and find myself just transfixed. Utterly transfixed. It was like looking into a mirror. But then something changed in you again. This prophecy nonsense changed something in you.
What you took for coddling, I took for education. I learned more from grandfather on what it means to be a king than I ever learned from you.
Aerys's expression turns hard and cold at Rhaegar's rebuff to his rare admission of affection.
Very well. If you have nothing you wish to learn from me on the matter of kingship, then I shall have to source your instruction from elsewhere, beginning with the lesson in humility you so clearly require. Now get out, before I change my mind and administer it myself.
Rhaegar studies his father for a long moment, a clear conflict visible on his face between the righteous anger of the insulted prince and the pained regret of the wounded son. He looks ready to speak, but instead turns his back and departs. Surprised to discover Varys waiting solicitously in the hallway, Rhaegar regards his erstwhile confederate coldly.
I believed you and I had an understanding. It would appear I was mistaken.
You must believe I meant no kind of betrayal in telling the king of your intentions in council, your grace, nor did I wish to ever be the cause of friction between father and son.
Every lock is different, Lord Varys, and some bonds are easier to break than others.
I live a precarious life here at court, your grace. I cannot serve your father's ends if Lord Tywin takes me for his enemy. Yet should I overstep in seeking his favour, your father will soon find me remiss in pursuing the campaign for which I was summoned to court. I am like a ranger walking the narrow path atop the wall, beset on both sides by wind and snow.
A ranger, is it? Then allow me to offer you a small word of advice. Watch your step, Lord Varys. At such a height, the fall will most certainly prove fatal.
Creeping quietly on her tiptoes, Elia Martell stalks towards the bunched folds of the heavy crimson drapes tied back from the windows.
Where, oh, where could Bella be hiding? Could she be here? Such a clever little sneak. I haven't a clue where she could be.
Elia smiles to herself and paces towards the bed.
Maybe she's hiding here?
Elia pounces on Bella.
Now I've got you.
Bella squirms and squeals in delight under Elia's tickles.
Don't let Pycelle catch you having fun.
Bella quickly scrabbles to her feet, hanging her head as though readying herself for a scolding.
If he suspects you're enjoying your little friend too much, he's like to send her way too.
It's the right sweet thing. It's only Uncle Lewyn, and he's only teasing.
Uncle Lewyn, and a letter from Doran.
Lewyn produces a parchment from his doublet and hands it to Elia. She tears the seal and sits cross-legged on the bed to scan her brother's writing.
Any news on Malario?
Only that she's as big as an aurochs already. My own letter said that she and Oberyn are no longer on speaking terms after he suggested she must be carrying triplets.
Oberyn's back in the country. Is he attending the games at Harrenhal?
I'm afraid I'm fresh out of answers. May I offer you an orange instead?
Lewyn swings a bag he carries at his side onto the bed. Elia descends upon its contents excitedly, pulling forth a fat, swollen orange. She holds it to her nose, closing her eyes and inhaling its sweet scent.
Oh, God, how I've missed that smell. Come here, my love.
She holds out a hand in invitation to Bella.
Have you ever tasted an orange?
Bella shakes her head, her eyes wide with fascination at the bag of exotic treats.
Well, we shall have to fix that right now, won't we?
Lewyn sits on the bed and plucks another orange from the bag. He offers it to Bella, but the girl makes no move to approach, and instead steps closer to Elia. Lewyn frowns in question at his niece.
I think her brother's tales of your adventures in the Kings would have scared her a little.
Elia puts a comforting arm around Bella.
It's all right, dear heart. Lewyn only herds bad people. He means you no harm.
Still wary, but trusting in Elia's reassurance, Bella accepts the orange from Lewyn. She turns it over, looks to Elia for instruction.
Watch me. Like this. See?
Elia begins to slowly peel her orange, Bella watching closely.
If Oberyn does pass this way, I've no doubt he'll pay us a visit. If your husband will permit it, at least.
I marry the Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, and my uncle still insists I could have done better for myself.
No man could ever be good enough for my favorite niece, prince or otherwise.
I'm your only niece.
Thank the gods for small mercies. A man can only carry so many oranges.
All right, now we just pull it apart like this. There you go. Take that one there. Now, pop it in your mouth, but don't chew just yet. Bite down just enough to burst the skin and let the juice out.
Bella does as she's bid. Her eyes double in size, and a broad smile raises her rosy cheeks.
Good.
Bella nods enthusiastically, Elia positively beaming at the happiness radiating from the little serving girl. She hands over the rest of the orange and watches contentedly as the girl eats.
I came by earlier and found you still abed. I'd been worried you were dead if you hadn't been snoring like a fat little piglet.
Aghast, Elia flings a handful of orange peel at Lewyn.
Bella, do I snore? You little traitor, away with you, I command it.
Bella moves to depart.
Hold on, you. I'll make you a deal. Promise to never gang up on me like that again, and I'll let you take as many oranges as you can carry. Deal?
Bella nods, and Elia gathers up 3 oranges, but turns back to discover Bella has folded over the bottom of her rough-spun dress to fashion a makeshift pouch.
Clever girl.
Elia drops another 6 oranges into Bella's pouch.
Be sure to share them with your brothers, won't you?
Moving carefully, lest she spill her treasures, Bella bows to Elia and Lewyn and scampers away.
She's new.
Isn't she darling?
Elia waits until they're alone, then turns to Lewyn with an excited pat on his knee.
Now, tell me everything. How was your rendezvous in the city?
Lewyn lies back on the bed, his smile ear to ear.
It was simply bliss. I don't believe I've stopped smiling since.
Can it be? Prince Elia Martell, the lifelong cynic, head over heels in love?
Can't you just hear the hearts breaking from the arbor to the wall?
I couldn't be happier for you, Lou. You know how I worry about you, all alone here, so far from home.
I'm never alone, so long as I have you.
I have my own family, Lewyn.
Elia sees the wince of pain on her uncle's face.
I'm sorry, Lou. That was a mean thing to say.
She prods Lewyn with her foot.
Say you forgive me.
Peel me an orange, and I'll consider it.
Elia picks an orange from the sack and sets to work.
I only meant that I want the same for you. I want you to have something that's just yours, something entirely your own.
I have something entirely my own. I'm wearing it right now.
Elia recognizes the melancholy on Lewyn's face, but knows better than to pick at an open wound.
I hear our new arrivals have been making quite the stir.
The lion cubs? Jaime's not a bad lad, I suppose. I like him better than his father, at least.
And what about Cersei? Is she truly as pretty as they say?
Breathtaking was the word I've been hearing most, along with a great array of others I couldn't possibly repeat in front of a lady. You need to keep an eye on that one.
Easy enough to say. Harder to do from my bedchamber.
Supposedly it was the boy Tywin called to court, and Cersei just tagged along.
You don't believe it?
If Cersei disobeyed her father and came without his consent, then her balls are even bigger than her brother's.
Elia hands Lewyn the peeled orange, and he pops a segment into his mouth.
Would it be so remarkable if you did summon her? Cersei's almost a woman grown. It's time her father found her a husband.
Aye, and if you're not careful, it'll be yours. Cersei Lannister is not the first pretty young thing to prance and preen and bat her eyelashes about the Red Keep. Each time you take to your sickbed, every lord in the city is suddenly inspired to summon his daughter to court like a fattened goose brought to market.
Even if Cersei did have designs on my husband, Rhaegar has no interest in little girls.
He liked them well enough on your wedding night, I seem to recall your telling me. You were, what, 17?
16. Seems like a lifetime ago now.
You're as beautiful today as you were back then, Elle.
Liar.
A knight of the King's Guard is incapable of lying. There's even something about it in our vows, I think.
And we both know how seriously you take those.
Rolling off the bed, Elia stands with hands on hips before her uncle.
Look at me, Lou. Then tell me I'm as beautiful as I was at 16. Look at how skinny I am. What has happened to my ass? I used to have a wonderful ass, and now look, bonier than an old crone. And look at these bags under my eyes. I don't even have the energy to dress anymore, or style my hair, and I smell, Lou. Here, smell for yourself.
She leans forward with raised arm and thrusts her armpit into her uncle's face.
Get away, you animal!
You see? It's like the sickness seeps right through my skin.
Stop, before I drag you to the stables and sloosh you down like a hard-ridden horse.
Lewyn extricates himself and jumps beyond Elia's reach. Despite her good humour, Lewyn notices how flushed Elia looks, how heavy her breathing, even from this brief exertion.
Gods, Elia, you look as though you've just run the city walls.
I'm fine. I tire so easily still.
Lewyn sits on the edge of the bed and brushes Elia's hair off her forehead, her skin clammy to the touch. He hands her a half-empty glass of water he finds on the bedside table and watches as she drinks.
It was never this bad after Rhaenys or Aegon. What does Pycelle have to say for himself?
Only that I have to take things slowly. Sleep, take my medicine, stay away from anything remotely stimulating. None of it seems to be doing any good.
If you spend less time wrestling with the help, perhaps you'd have the strength for your own children to pay a visit.
Now it's Lewyn's turn to see the pain his words have caused, written plainly as they are in Elia's wounded expression.
That was a mean thing to say. Forgive me, child.
Elia crosses her arms, refusing Lewyn's apology. He offers her his orange. She takes it, but her expression makes clear she remains unappeased. Lewyn sighs, selects a second orange, and begins to peel.
You always did drive a hard bargain.
Oh, these are just for starters. You have to do something else for me before we're even.
Catelyn and Brandon walk together along the battlements, the young lady of Riverrun every so often casting her eyes towards her betrothed, then quickly dancing away when he returns her gaze, though never so quickly that he does not first have time to register the coquettish tilt to her attentions. She points out towards the rolling green fields to the north, and the broad azure river that sparkles in the sun.
That's the Tumblestone.
Brandon smiles and nods politely.
Yes.
Catelyn sweeps her arm southward.
The Red Fork.
Again, Brandon nods.
Of course, yes.
It meets with the Trident, a little north of Lord Harroway's town.
I'm familiar with the Red Fork.
My apologies, I did not mean to bore you.
The Red Fork is where my ancestor Torrhen Stark surrendered his crown to Aegon the Conqueror.
Yes, of course, I'm sorry, I should have remembered that.
No apologies necessary, milady. It's our history to remember, not yours.
If it happened within sight of Riverrun, then I think it belongs to the history of the Riverlands as much as it does the North.
Before Aegon and his sisters arrived on the dragons, we were a free people. In the North, we don't talk about Aegon the Conqueror lightly, nor the king who knelt.
Well, Here in the Riverlands, we consider it extremely rude for a guest to presume to tell a host which parts of their own lands and their own history they may or may not take as their own.
Brandon and Catelyn regard one another for a cool second, before Catelyn turns away and continues walking.
I apologise if I was abrupt.
I suppose it won't matter soon anyway. Once we're married, our histories will be intertwined, and in our children even more so.
You picture our children?
You don't?
In time.
I've always imagined myself having a large family.
Brandon has no answer to that. He looks back towards the yard.
Perhaps we might curtail our tour for the time being. My father was keen for me to sit down with yours at the earliest opportunity.
Oh, I see.
There's still much to discuss.
I had hoped we might take a walk in the country together. I could show you the sluice gates. Once open to both rivers, Riverrun becomes something of an island, surrounded on all sides by water, and it's really rather impressive to see.
There'll be time enough to kill once everything is settled.
He immediately realises his poor choice of words has been received with commensurate poor humour.
I only meant...
It's fine, really. I suppose I'm just a little surprised to learn the wild wolf is quite so conscientious in obeying his Lord Father's instructions.
Brandon squints at the sun that shines into his face now he has turned to face Catelyn, though the brightness cannot account for the sudden flush that comes to his face, nor the clench to his jawline.
A walk in the countryside sounds delightful.
He runs 2 fingers across the dryness of his lips.
Might we stop for a drink before we depart? The coming spring feels so much warmer down here in the south.
We could go by the kitchens, collect some canteens of water to take with us.
What would be good? But ale would be better.
It's not even midday.
Then we can drink slowly.
My father doesn't really like us drinking.
I see.
I suppose, given the occasion...
I'm sure I can survive until supper. Shall we continue?
Catelyn gives a non-committal nod, and they carry on along the battlements.
That's another change to come once we're married. At my table, you may drink as much as you care to. For all my faults, I've never once given cause to call me mean when it comes to sharing round my wine.
My father does not keep wine from his table because he is mean. He simply believes drunkenness is unbecoming in a woman.
My sister Lyanna often drinks with her meals. In fact, your father shared a toast with her the night before we departed Winterfell.
My father may have turned a blind eye out of respect for his host, but he certainly did not raise Lysa and I to behave in such a way.
No, only to pass judgment upon those that do. It's a wonder Lord Oster can suffer to send his prim and proper little flower away to live among we barbarous northern savages.
A wonder indeed. Perhaps I shall appeal to him to find a more suitable match, one that knows how to speak to a lady with neither insult nor a bellyful of beer.
Perhaps you should, and spare me a veritable battalion of children raised to be as stern and humorless as sceptres.
Humorless? It's you, Brandon Stark, that would rather count coppers with my father than spend the day riding with your betrothed.
Catelyn storms away, her face flushed and her hands shaking in anger. Despite having little notion to whence he might be striding, Brandon mirrors Catelyn's departure in the opposite direction.
Peter, it was just awful. I tried to be interesting and he just looked bored. I tried to be funny and he never so much as smiled.
Catelyn sits hunched over the edge of her bed, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Peter paces at her window, his agitation at her distress plain upon his face.
Oh, and then we argued about the most ridiculous things.
Peter hurries over and drops to his knees before her.
Hush, sweet little cat. I'm sure you tried your very best, but not even you, kind, gentle, generous you, can ever hope to spin even the coarsest silk from a sow's ear.
I wanted everything to be perfect for our first proper day together, but he didn't even make an effort.
I can't say I'm surprised he behaved like such a cad, if even half the stories I've heard are to be believed.
I don't want to hear it, Peter. I don't. I just feel so stupid for even thinking that he...
Of course it hurts to learn the truth, I know. But I only want to make this easier for you, to help you see what kind of man this wild wolf really is, and where the fault should rightfully lie.
You really shouldn't call him that. I shouldn't have either. I knew he didn't like it.
Stop that, please, even if only on my account. It breaks my heart to hear you blaming yourself like this.
I did give offence to his house.
That shouldn't matter to the man that truly deserves your love. The man that will never make you cry. That will never put his foolish pride before your happiness. The man that doesn't see you as an obligation, as some kind of stepping stone on the way to his prize of greater wealth and power. But the man that wants you, has always wanted you, because he knows that you are the prize.
Peter takes a seat beside Catelyn on the edge of her bed, close enough that his shoulder touches hers.
Do you remember the day I first arrived at Riverrun?
I don't think so. Feels like you've always been here.
I'm hardly surprised. For a High Lord's daughter, it was just another idyllic day in an unbroken string of thousands just like it. But for me, it was the beginning of everything. The guards didn't know my father. Why should they? He was just a petty lord of a miserable strip of land on the least of the fingers. They took him for a common craftsman and sent us through the servants' entrance. Your father was away on some business or other, so Maester Kim told me to run along and occupy myself until his return. I wandered about your halls for hours, chased from one room after another by your cooks, your chambermaids, your household guard. I ended up in the stables, a pitchfork pushed into my hands, shoveling horseshit until my palms were blistered and my clothes stained brown and black. It was your uncle the Blackfish that rescued me. I was vain enough to think he'd recognize my clothes were at least a little finer than those of the common stable boy. But I know now he simply spotted an unfamiliar face. He had me bathed and dressed and brought me down to supper. That was the first time I saw you, sitting beside your father at the high table. I still remember the hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach, the sweat between my palms. The Blackfish must have sensed how nervous I was because he leaned down close and whispered, "It's all right, lad. I don't really belong here either." I think that was the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. And the cruelest.
Oh, Peter, I never knew any of that. If anything I've ever done has ever made you feel like...
No, you mustn't think that. You're the one thing that has ever made me feel like I do belong here.
Peter, I don't know that I...
Oh, but I do. Ever since that very first day. But only now that I'm a man grown am I bold enough to reach out and take it.
Peter leans in to kiss her. Catelyn pulls back and leaps to her feet.
What are you doing?
You said he insulted you. That you told him you were going to appeal to your father.
We had a row, Peter. I said some things I shouldn't have, but we are not breaking our betrothal over a few cross words.
Peter blinks, uncomprehending.
I don't want you to marry Brennan Stark.
I'm sorry if I ever gave you the wrong idea, Peter, but it doesn't really matter what you want.
Peter flinches back as though struck. 1,000 daydreams of how this moment would play out, shattering into pieces about his feet.
I forbid you to marry that man. Don't laugh at me. Don't you dare laugh at me.
Peter, I'm sorry. I don't mean to, but really, you have to see.
Peter turns and flees from the room.
Peter! What did you say to him?
It's nothing, Lysa. Just let him go.
Oh, you shouldn't play with Peter like that.
And you shouldn't play with him at all. Do you really think I don't hear him sneaking into your chambers at night?
Lysa's hand flattens against her chest, reflexively scandalised at the suggestion.
You've always had a sordid little imagination. The feelings Peter and I have for one another runs far deeper than whatever grubby business you're imagining.
Catelyn rolls her eyes and turns away dismissively, but her sister grabs her arm and spins her back round.
You can't stand it, can you? You can't stand that I have something with Peter that you'll never have with Brandon.
Don't be absurd, Lysa.
I won't let you take him from me. Peter's mine.
Then go chase after him and offer him whatever comforts you care to. I've got more important things on my mind right now than some silly little boy and your petty jealousies.
Of course you do. That's all you ever have on your mind. What you want and how you can use others to get it. You go crying to Father or Uncle Brynden or poor Peter. Peter most of all. Only now you're not getting exactly what you want from Brandon, so you come running back to where you know you can find it. Well, you're not going to get it this time. Not from my Peter. Do you hear me? You're not going to use him ever again. Peter? Peter!
As Catelyn listens to her sister's retreating footsteps, the gears of her mind begin to turn, a sly smile creeping at the corners of her lips. Gerald Hightower walks with a steady, measured step of authority along the corridors of the Red Keep, his white-plumed dress helmet tucked under one arm.
Lord Commander?
Gerald turns to find Tywin approaching.
My Lord Hand, I was just on my way to council. I had hoped we—
How dare you put my son's life in jeopardy like that?
Taken aback at such precipitous hostility from a man renowned for his calculated reserve, Gerald takes a second to recover his thoughts.
The sortie was under instruction to gather intelligence only, my lord. It was not my men that drew first steel, but the Brotherhood.
Jaime is still just a boy. He has no business in battle.
By all accounts, the boy handled himself with the self-assurance and skill of a man twice his age.
He should never have been permitted the opportunity. His safety was your responsibility.
Sir Jaime made that decision for himself. And let us not forget, my lord, this was not the first time a son of Casterly Rock has rushed headlong into danger without my leave.
Tywin glowers at Gerald, dismissive of the illusion and disdainful of Gerald's efforts at mitigation.
The day you put my son and heir in harm's way again is the day his grace shall have a vacancy to fill in the ranks of his Kingsguard. Am I understood?
Lesser men have withered before the furnace of Tywin Lannister's wrath, but Gerald Hightower is not a man easily intimidated.
Do not mistake me for one of your pitiable lickspittles, my Lord Hand. I do not take threats lightly, even the empty ones. You know as well as I that the King's Guard is a lifetime appointment.
My point precisely.
Tywin leaves his steely glare fixed upon Gerald a moment longer, then turns and continues on towards his chambers.
If you're looking for a fight, my Lord Hand, might I suggest you pick it with your old friend, the King. It was his insistence that Jaime spend the day with the White Cloaks.
Even across the 10 feet that separates them, Gerald is certain he can hear Tywin's teeth grinding. The King's Hand shows his back to Gerald and begins up the steps towards his chambers. Gerald permits himself a derisive half-smile, then follows after Tywin.
A raven arrived from the citadel this morning, my lords. The conclave has met, considered reports from maesters all over the 7 kingdoms, and declared that spring is finally arrived.
Varys looks askance at the contents of the birdcage Pycelle chose, with a passive-aggressive smirk to place directly before the council's newest member, obscuring him from Tywin's view.
In Essos, we name a group of ravens an unkindness. Still, how conscientious of the conclave to deliver us their decision personally.
A conclave of Grand Maesters rendered this verdict. The birds are purely ceremonial.
I believe our Master of Whispers was speaking in jest, Grand Maester.
Varys smiles at Pycelle in confirmation. Pycelle mutters petulant curses under his breath.
Lord Chelstead. Lord Chelstead, you have news of your own, I believe.
I do, my Lord Hand, though I fear it will not be so gladly met. It seems Lord Darkland has once again failed to satisfy Duskendale's obligation to the Crown's treasury.
Not this nonsense again.
This makes, 3 months of arrears?
4, my lord. It appears Lord Darkland's failure in paying his due taxes was no mere oversight after all, but rather a deliberate provocation. He seems set upon a royal charter of a peace with Dawns.
Oh, preposterous. Simply absurd.
Darkling cannot truly believe his glorified fishing village merits the same prerogative over import tariffs as Sunspear.
Lord Dennis has been rather vocal in making his intentions known among the small folk, and it would appear they have rallied behind him in a pact of solidarity of some sort. Lord Dennis has decreed that the people of Duskendale need not pay anything in taxes to him until he next pays taxes to the throne.
Which he will not do until the king grants him his charter.
Precisely, my Lord Hand.
The chamber falls silent while Tywin digests these tidings. Pycelle, Carlton, and Lucerys side-eye one another, each man eager to be the first to speak, but all three wary of committing an opinion before they know which way Tywin's judgment will fall. Varys looks to each in turn, then decides an errant bolt will still come closer to the target than a bolt left unfired.
Duskendale has been a true and stalwart friend of House Targaryen since the days of the dance, my lord Hand. Lord Denys lost both sons and all three grandsons upon the stepstones.
Pycelle scowls, his umbrage at Varys's attempt to anticipate Tywin's verdict outweighing his caution against speaking out of turn.
When the cur ceases to heed its master's command, you do not spare the boot on account of the pup's affection. The man's own words condemn him as a traitor.
Tywin considers the Grand Maester closely, his expression inscrutable.
If one man refuses his obligations to the crown without consequences today, 3 more will test their fortune tomorrow. A fire can only spread once the first spark is permitted to take light.
Pycelle turns a victorious smile towards Varys.
And yet, however misguided Darkling's transgressions may be, allowance must be granted for the tensions of the present moment. The winter months left many a lord with little occupation, and gnawing upon old grievances will have likely proved too tempting a distraction for men far more formidable than Denys Darkling. This is not the time to test their loyalties by serving an overly heavy hand to one of their own.
It is Varys's turn to smile now, as Pycelle's own curdles upon his lips.
Lord Denys is an old man, past fortunate to see another spring. The mind tends to weaken with age. One's memory begins to fail. Perhaps it's time we reminded Lord Denys what fate befalls those vassal houses that presume to reach above their station. Dispatch a bard to Duskendale at once.
And what song shall this bard sing, I wonder?
The council leaps to its feet at the sight of Prince Rhaegar standing in the doorway.
My lords, please forgive my tardiness.
There is nothing to forgive, your grace. You are a prince, and princes may sleep as late as they wish.
Rhaegar grins good-naturedly, unconsciously rubbing his thumb across his fingertips, still red and swollen from another night spent abroad with his harp.
I was actually sitting over in the small council chamber until a helpful young man amongst your household guard told me the council was now meeting in the Tower of the Hand.
My apologies, your grace. Given your father's absence, I saw little sense in dragging his councillors to the far side of the Red Keep when my own chambers might serve just as well.
Far more efficient, I'm sure, and the gods know we could all use the exertion. Could we not, my lords?
As Rhaegar speaks, he walks around the table and places himself in the chair vacated by Tywin. Rhaegar gives no sign of having noticed the displacement, but the other members of the council watch in fascination for Tywin's next move. With only a minor hesitation, so brief it might otherwise have gone without notice, Tywin takes the hand's traditional seat to Rhaegar's left.
Lord
Shall we
Chelstead,
move on
you were
to...
saying?
Apologies, your grace.
The fault was entirely mine. Please continue.
Lord Valerion, I understand you have news from the Arbour.
Regrettably so, my Lord Hand. I have received word from Lord Redwyn that for several weeks now a small contingent of pirate ships has been hassling the shipping lanes between our 2 ports.
The Stepstones have provided rich hunting grounds to pirates for centuries, and will continue to do so until the free cities acknowledge their responsibility for its security.
A day for which we all wait with bated breath, I'm sure. But I fear these most recent attacks came from earlier in the fleet's passage, along the southern coast of Dawn.
There must be some mistake. The southern coast of Dawn is 400 leagues of sheer cliff face, beset by whirlpools and half-submerged shoals, without safe landing for even the boldest of captains.
I know it well, your grace, but clearly not so well as these pirates. Somehow they have been able to find sufficient harbour to the north of our lanes.
Do we know where these pirates came from? What colours did they fly?
Black and yellow, pink and blue, green and white. Reports are confused as yet. There were those among the crews of those ships that escaped the attack
that swear the pirates could be heard speaking the common tongue.
And Lord Redwyn is sufficiently distressed by these pirates to petition the crown for assistance.
He is, your grace.
And as master of ships, what is your opinion on the reasonableness of Lord Redwyn's request?
Half the wine this city drinks is Dornish red, your grace, but the other half is Arbor gold. I'd hate to imagine how much worse this winter might have been without Lord Redwyn's exports to keep the people's spirits from spluttering out entirely. It is in the Crown's interest to ensure the integrity of our trade routes.
Lucerys glances at Tywin, then forges ahead.
I would gladly captain an escort to ensure the next transport arrives to King's Landing unmolested. Give me leave to assemble my crew, ready my ships, and we can be under sail the morning after next.
I do not welcome the added expense to the treasury, but the cost pales in comparison beside the potential loss of import tariffs should Lord Redwyn seek safer ports further afield.
The Redwyn fleet is second only to the Iron Fleet in size, is it not?
It is.
Surely then the Arbor has the means of settling this matter themselves without the Crown's assistance.
If I may, my Lord Hand, it is precisely a consequence of the peace your astute management has engendered about the realm that the Redwyn fleet is no longer equipped as a marital force. It has been 20 years since the Ironborn forsworn their raids upon the Seven Kingdoms, and Lord Redwyn has used that security to transform his fleet into an almost entirely merchant endeavour. The few remaining warships are retained close to port for the defence of the Arbor.
If Lord Redwyn has spent these past 20 years pocketing his profits rather than reinvesting responsibly to ensure his fleet's safe passage, I do not see why it should fall to the Crown to assume the necessary expenditure. Wouldn't you agree, my lords?
We cannot commit ourselves to the practice of launching the royal fleet on the whim and fancy of every lord with a pirate problem, no more than we can muster the army to run down every bandit robbing purses along the King's Road.
Pirates are a notoriously craven breed. One taste of Lord Redwyne's wrath will prove sufficient to send these contemptible creatures scurrying for their bolt holes, I have no doubt.
Rhaegar studies each man, then turns expectantly to Varys. The eunuch does what the others would not, and meets the prince's eyes, but only for a moment, and after the quickest of glances in Tywin's direction, he shakes his head in resignation.
With all due respect to our friends from the Arbor, I wonder if perhaps Lord Redwyn has overstated the danger at hand somewhat. It seems beyond curious that a mere band of brigands should risk inciting the ire and might of the Iron Throne.
You cannot be suggesting that Lord Redwyn is lying. To what possible end would he deceive this council by conjuring phantoms from the sea?
I suggest only that the Crown would be best served by keeping itself apart from the matter until events have progressed into clearer focus.
All eyes turn to Rhaegar. He sits in silence, turning the matter over in his mind.
You make a strong argument, my lords, yet I confess myself unconvinced.
Consensus is a rare thing, your grace, even among men that share the common cause of serving the interests of the realm, and yet this council is near unanimous in its verdict on this matter. What use the collective wisdom and experience gathered about this table if rare consensus is left unheeded?
Rhaegar rests his chin in his hand a moment, contemplating the decision before him. Finally, he sighs and smiles apologetically at the master of ships.
I fear we find ourselves outnumbered, Lord Lucerys. Send word to Lord Redwyn that no martial aid shall be forthcoming.
It need not be a large sortie, your grace.
You may reassure Lord Redwyn of our readiness to revisit his request at a later date, should the situation fail to resolve itself.
Perhaps even one ship properly equipped might prove...
His Grace has given you his decision, Lord Lucerys. The matter is closed.
Lucerys looks for a moment as though he's prepared to push his cause uphill, but finding himself entirely without support at table, he reluctantly cedes the field.
As you say, my Lord Hand.
In the crypts beneath Winterfell, Rickard Stark stands before the final resting place of his father, studying his likeness carved in stone.
I need to know I'm doing the right thing. We need to be stronger if we're going to face what's coming.
Rickard shifts his torch to the right, illuminating the statue of Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt.
Perhaps I'd be better asking him. He knew what it meant.
My lord?
Rickard turns to discover Maester Wallace standing awkwardly at the edge of the torchlight. Rickard reads his expression and sighs.
Again?
Young Harwin says she took her palfrey and rode south this morning.
The Lord of Winterfell takes a last, lingering look at his forebears.
Have Hull unsaddle the horses.
Rounding the corner of the open-air catwalk above the Red Keep's inner courtyard, Rhaegar and Barristan discover Cersei sitting on a stone bench set against the castle wall. The two men look at one another, the sight of the sniffling young woman made only more confounding by the enormous gilded harp set beside her. Rhaegar holds up a hand for Barristan to remain where he is, and the Kingsguard watches with a cynical smile as his prince cautiously approaches Cersei.
My lady?
Cersei leaps to her feet as though disturbed from a dream.
Your Grace!
She turns away, bringing her hands up to cover her tears.
Forgive me. I did not mean for anyone to see me like this.
There's nothing to forgive, my lady, but, if I may be so bold, whatever in the world has caused you such upset?
Oh, it's silly, really.
Rhaegar takes her gently by the elbow and draws her back to the bench, taking up the harp to make room for himself beside her.
Silly or not, it must be important to you, or he would not have bored you to tears.
It's my father. It's his name day a little over a moon's turn from now, and he has asked me to play that thing at the celebrations.
I had no idea you played, and such a beautiful instrument too. But why should this cause you such distress?
With my father so long away from the rock, I fell into the habit of neglecting my practice. All these years I've managed to convince him to the contrary, but now he's going to discover the truth, and in front of the entire court.
A wave of fresh tears spills over Cersei's fulsome lashes. She wipes at them with the green brocade of her sleeve. Rhaegar reaches into his pocket and hands her a red silken handkerchief with golden stitching. Cersei dabs at her cheeks and hands him back the handkerchief, but Rhaegar demurs.
Please, you hold on to it.
When I think about what my father might do when I embarrass him like that, he's going to banish me back to Casterly Rock. I just know it.
Perhaps I could speak with Lord Tywin. If I explain the situation...
If only I knew a harpist. Someone that could tutor me and improve my playing before Father's name day.
Cersei hangs her head, despondent, but takes a sly peek through the veil of her long golden hair to read Rhaegar's reaction.
As it happens, I actually have a little training in the harp myself.
Cersei sits upright, her eyes wide with hopeful surprise.
You do?
My mother was always adamant the arts received equal accommodation in my education, but then I've never had the occasion to be a teacher myself, and I don't really think...
I'm sure you'd be a wonderful teacher.
In her excitement, Cersei grabs Rhaegar's arm in both hands where it rests upon his thigh.
And I'd be the very best student, I swear it. I'll hang on your every word. I'll practice as many hours as you tell me.
As flattered as I am by your enthusiasm, my lady, my time is often not my own. I have great many...
We can work entirely to your liking. It doesn't matter if it's very first thing in the morning or very last thing at night. Whenever you want me, I'll be there. I'll be at your beck and call, I promise. Oh, please, Your Grace, please say you'll come to my rescue.
Rhaegar looks into Cersei's wide, imploring eyes of entrancing green, the frame of her golden locks acting like a horse's blinkers, narrowing the prince's world down to Cersei's impassioned, tearful face, tilted back to gaze up solicitously into his own.
Of course. It will be my pleasure.
Oh!
Cersei throws her arms around Rhaegar's neck and holds herself close to his chest.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, my prince, you don't know what this means to me.
Rhaegar keeps his hands firmly at his side, meeting Barristan's gaze over Cersei's shoulder. The King's Guard discreetly turns his back, chuckling to himself at his prince's evident discomfort. In the small and Spartan sleeping cell in the White Sword Tower, Sir Harlan Grandison lies upon his narrow bed, a heavy wrapping of bandages about his head. Gerald sits at his bedside, the white book open in his lap.
Sir Balon Belmore, the 19-hour night, they called him. Sir Paxter killed on the stepstones on the first day. Old King Jaehaerys names Belmore his replacement on the second day. Maelys shoves a sword through his middle on the third. When the king wrapped the cloak about Sir Gawain's shoulders, you could still see the gash in the fabric left by Maelys' blade. A cleaner end than his brother Boros, at least. They say Mellors twisted his head from his shoulders with his bare hands, that white-plumed great helm of his still attached. Sir Mallory Shett. Shett by name, Shett by nature, old Eustace Hogg used to say, until Sir Mallory birthed a coil of rope on Sir Eustace's pillow after a belly full of Dornish peppers. Sir Harry Wendwater. Gods, I haven't thought about him in years. Was he the Harry with the whiskers, or was that Harry Condon? Yeah. Too many names. Too many years. Duncan the Tall. Sir Duncan served 23 years in the King's Guard, including 9 as Lord Commander, raised to that honour by His Grace Aegon Targaryen, 5th of his name. Died by wildfire in the tragedy at Summerhall in the 259th year after the conquest. I wrote that myself, the day Aerys named me Lord Commander.
He runs a finger over the page, the ink of these last lines blotted and smudged.
We were the youngest men in white cloaks that day, save for Barristan. And now we're older than any of our brothers ever lived to be. More than 20 years later, I can still remember every detail. Do you know what stuck with me the most? I know for you it was the screams. I lost count of how many times I found you wandering the tower, nightmares of those screams dogging your heels. For me, it was the smell. It didn't matter how many times I washed my whites, or how hard I scrubbed my armor. I would bathe 3 times a day for weeks, scrubbing at my skin with a scouring brush till it was red and bloody. And somehow, I still couldn't seem to shake that smell. I ended up burning my whites and scrapping my armor. It was the better part of a year before I could walk past the kitchens again without feeling my stomach turn.
Gerald turns to Harlan's page and reluctantly takes up his quill, dipping it in a pot of ink on Harlan's nightstand.
There was a time I actually liked writing in this thing. It felt like an honor. But now, I can't remember the last time I put quill to parchment for anything other than a passing. Another brother, dead and gone. I'm going to close this book now, Harlan, and I don't mean to open it again for a very long time. Do you hear me?
Gerald begins to do so, but is interrupted by Jaime's arrival in the doorway.
Forgive me, Lord Commander. I did not mean to intrude.
Come in, lad. I've no doubt Harlan will be glad of another voice besides my own.
Gerald pulls up a second chair, and Jaime sits.
Can he hear us?
Pycelle says not, but I can't see how it can do any harm to hold to the contrary.
Jaime nods at the white book, still open on Gerald's lap.
Is that?
The most important book nobody has ever read. Every child of letters knows the 7-pointed star, front to back, but there's not a soul in the 7 kingdoms that could name more than a couple dozen of these knights, let alone the deeds that fill their pages.
You could send it to the Citadel. Have the maesters make copies.
Gerald smiles to himself.
Old King Jaehaerys used to say, the 7 kingdoms would never be united so long as we were one people separated by a common history.
I'm not sure I follow.
There are only 3 things in this world that truly belong to a Kingsguard. His whites, his name, and a page in that book.
Gerald's expression sours for half a heartbeat, as though he's just sampled something distasteful to his palate.
Even our honor we share with our king.
He considers for a moment, then offers the White Book to Jaime.
Every house in every kingdom claims a little bit of this country's history for their own, but this is just for us.
Jaime takes the book and holds it reverently across his lap. He turns the page as delicately as a father cradling his newborn son.
But all the great deeds recounted on these pages, there must be 100 knights here that deserve to have their names immortalized in song.
You're still a young man, with a young man's notion of service. True service does not allow for personal glory.
Is that why you don't compete in tourney?
I don't compete in tourney because I could never balance a lance to save my life. But yes, that too.
Yet you allow Sir Arthur and Sir Barristan to compete.
Gerald notices with wry amusement that Jaime has turned with haste to the page dedicated to Sir Arthur.
The world has never known two finer knights than Sir Arthur and Sir Barristan, and we should count our blessings every day that they both came along in our lifetime. But the common folk knew their names long before they took their vows, and it's hard for a man to ever be entirely satisfied with watered-down wine after drinking his fill on the heady vintage of popular acclaim.
You make it sound as though they're slaves to their own glory, yet you still name them the finest Kingsguard you've ever known.
The finest knights, the King's Guard, is something else entirely.
I suppose I never really considered the distinction.
It's not an easy distinction to understand.
Then who is the finest Kingsguard you know?
Gerald nods at Harlan.
You're looking at him.
Sir Harlan Grandison, named the Kingsguard by King Aegon Targaryen, 5th of his name, in the 7th year of his reign, served ably in the War of the Ninepenny Kings, took a wound fighting beside his brothers against the Kingswood bandits.
I'll not insult the name by calling them a brotherhood.
Jaime turns the page, but finds it blank.
That's all there is.
40 years of service to 3 different kings, day in and day out, since he was little older than you are now. He stood his post, kept his king's secrets, and never asked for anything in return but the honour of wearing a white cloak. That's what makes him the very best of us.
And the worst?
Gerald thumbs through the White Book, then prods a finger at the page.
Sir Criston Cole.
The Kingmaker.
He may have overstepped his proper duty, I know, but those were extraordinary times. He only did what he thought was right, what he thought his vows demanded.
I don't care what his reasons were. Once you intervene in the affairs of the realm to the point that you earn yourself an epithet like that, you've failed as a brother of the Kingsguard.
Jaime looks at Gerald sceptically.
You've never been tempted to take advantage of your influence? Not once in all the years you've been Lord Commander?
Gerald considers Jaime for what feels like an age. He sighs and takes a final look at Harlan's entry.
That's a story for a different day, young sir.
Gerald and Jaime turn to find Lewyn standing on the threshold.
The brothers are ready for your briefing, Lord Commander.
Gerald stands and joins Lewyn at the door. Jaime remains seated.
I'd like to sit with Sir Harlan a while longer, if you'd allow me.
Gerald smiles and nods. He and Lewyn move to depart, but the Dornishman checks back and relieves Jaime of the White Book, tucking it possessively under one arm.
You know you don't have to be a horse's arse all your life, don't you, Lewyn?
I'm a prince, Gerald. It's my prerogative to be a horse's arse.
Not when you're wearing your whites, you're not. The lad's proved his worth, wouldn't you say?
The lad's a Lannister. I'll always look at him sideways, whatever color I'm wearing, and you'd be wise to do the same.
Funny. I remember more than one of our brothers saying something similar about you not so long ago.
The last of the funeral party amble down the shallow hill towards Storm's End, leaving Robert and Ned alone beside the freshly filled graves of Lord and Lady Baratheon.
All that ceremony over a pair of oil paintings. What a farce.
I suppose the Septon felt we had to bury something.
I'd have been better served sending to the Iron Islands for a priest of the drowned god.
Ned nods at the stragglers entering through the castle's gates.
We'd better head down. You'll need to show your face at least.
Fine. But then you and me are riding to the tavern and giving my parents a proper send-off.
Have you spoken with Stannis yet?
I'm certain we'll run into one another sooner or later. It's not that big a castle.
Robert.
Maegor's teats, Ned. I'll talk to my brother when I'm good and ready. Stop nibbling at me like a nagging wife.
Speaking of which...
Ned produces a scroll from his cloak, the wax seal imprinted with the head of a dire wolf.
I'm not sure if this is the proper time to do this, but it feels wrong to keep it from you. It arrived this morning.
Robert stares at the scroll with an expression that betrays his conflicted feelings, as though the scroll were a venomous snake plated in solid gold.
The words are typically written on the inside, Robert.
I can't. What if it's bad news?
Then I made the right decision giving it to you now. However bad, it's not going to ruin an otherwise pleasant day.
Robert takes the scroll and carefully breaks the seal.
Wait.
What is it? What's the matter?
Nothing's the matter. It's just so rare to see your confidence shaken. I'd like to savour the sight for a moment.
Scowling at his smirking friend, Robert unfurls the parchment. Ned watches Robert's face as he reads Lord Rickard's words.
Lyanna and I are to be married. I'm getting married, Ned.
Robert lifts Ned off the ground in a crushing bear hug and dances a little jig, swinging his friend about as though he were as light as a child's doll. Setting Ned down on his feet, Robert drops two enormous paws upon his shoulders and looks into his face with an expression of grave and sudden import.
We're to be brothers, Ned. Real brothers, bonded by law.
Ned squeezes Robert's arm, touched to see his friend's giddy delight. So giddy, in fact, that he entirely fails to notice the momentary pall of unease that passes over Ned's smile like a storm cloud across the midday sun. Rickard pauses in the doorway of the tavern, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the gloom. Ser Roderick stands alert at his lord's back, one hand poised and ready on the pommel of the sword he wears upon his hip.
Patrick?
My lord?
I'm not here for trouble, just my daughter.
In the back.
The innkeep points a finger at Roderick.
But he stays outside.
Rickard considers a moment, then gestures for Roderick to comply. The bewhiskered knight glares coldly at Patrick, then exits. Rickard places 2 silver coins on the bar.
For your trouble.
Your coin's no good here.
But you'll take my daughters all the same.
I don't believe in punishing children for the wrongs their fathers do me.
Rickard decides to leave well enough alone and passes through to the back room of the inn. Lyanna sits with 3 companions at a table in the far corner, a tankard of ale in hand.
Simple. So we go round in a table and...
Everyone takes a turn.
I'm telling it. Yes, right, so everyone takes a turn and we get to say something we've never done before.
Something true, mind.
Yes, something true. So you have to be honest or the game doesn't work. So, Mark, you'd say something like, I've never been to a brothel before.
Aye, without taking a jackass and a honeycomb with you.
No, you have to be serious. All right, look, let me give you my own example.
Spying Rickard's approach, Lyanna's friends break off their conversation and look to Lyanna for her lead. She hesitates, then nods in answer, and they make a hurried exit.
Do you have any idea how many taverns Sir Roderick and I have searched for you? I was beginning to think you'd run away to join the Golden Company, the way you always threatened when you were little.
Rickard smiles, charmed at the memory.
Do you recall when you chased off your second sceptre and I forbade you from riding for 3 months? You couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, but you somehow...
If that's your approach, then you should have found me sooner. I drank through nostalgic 4 pints ago.
Rickard nods at the tankard in Lyanna's hand.
And that one?
Bitter. appropriately enough.
Pulling out a stool across from his daughter, Rickard takes up an abandoned tankard and takes a long drink.
I was worried about you.
Oh, I can only imagine. What would Lord Robert have to say should some harm come to his bride before the sale could be completed?
I did not sell you, Lyanna.
No gold exchanged hands, perhaps, but a transaction took place all the same. An exchange of goods. Robert gets me, and you get, what, a wealthy son-in-law? Trade connections in the south?
Have you ever known me to covet wealth, or give more than a passing thought to anything or anyone below the neck?
Then tell me why.
However I explain it, you're not going to understand.
You're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how you could know me so little as to think I can't decide what's best for myself. I don't understand how it's possible that I've lived my whole life around you and you still know me no better than a stranger. How many times did I refuse to play at dolls and run off to wrestle and fight in the woods with the boys? How many times did I tear my dresses or stain them with mud until you finally grew tired of the scepter's complaints and just let me wear my riding leathers instead?
You never did like being treated differently from the boys. I sometimes wonder if your mother had been around.
It was never about wanting to be like the boys or not wanting to be like the girls. It was about wanting to be me. That's all I've ever wanted. The freedom to be who I want to be.
Do you remember the last time we were both here? I must have been 12, I think. It was Ned's last name day before you sent him to the Eyrie. You held a banquet at Winterfell in celebration, and I wanted a cup of wine so I could toast to him with all the grown-ups.
But you refused. I begged, I pleaded, I threatened, I bargained, but you wouldn't budge. So I snuck away from the hall, saddled my horse, and rode all the way here. I told the innkeep's son I'd see him locked up in Winterfell's dungeon if he didn't let me drink, and for some reason he believed I had the power to do that. So all night he smuggled tankards of ale to me upstairs. I was so drunk when you came to find me. I remember throwing up all over your back when we were riding home. I'm not proud of the way I behaved that night. It was childish, it was petulant, and it was a mistake. But it was my mistake. It just breaks my heart to know that I was the only one that learned something from it.
Rickard takes another drink. He wipes his mouth on the back of his sleeve and studies the dregs at the bottom of his cup.
You can't understand, Lyanna, because you have no children of your own.
What does that have to do with any of this?
Because the day the Maester puts your child in your arms for the first time, this defenceless little life that's completely dependent on you to feed it, to love it, to keep it safe from harm, that's the day you'll learn what it truly means to be afraid. And that's the day you'll understand.
Afraid of what?
Anything that might do your child harm. Which is to say, everything.
All my life, I've never once seen you afraid.
Well, then at least I've done one thing right.
Lyanna studies her father silently for a moment, chewing at her bottom lip. Her face softens, and she reaches out a hand and places it upon his own.
You've done a lot of things right.
Nothing your mother wouldn't have done better.
That's not true. Except maybe when I got my moon blood for the first time.
I've apologised for that. I just wasn't expecting...
I mean, how can a man that's been to war get weak-kneed at the sight of a blood-stained dress?
Weak kneed.
You turned white as snow and had to sit down.
I was just a little light-headed.
Lyanna smiles at her father's discomfort, both past and present.
I thought I did rather well under the circumstances.
Rickard returns the smile and squeezes his daughter's hand.
I wish she was here now to help you through this. I wish you could have known her.
You've told me so many stories. I've never felt like I didn't.
The truth is, Lyanna, I've been terrified every minute of every day since Brandon first came into this world, and it only got worse when you and your brothers came along.
Lyanna is mortified to realise her father is on the verge of tears. She feels her own composure beginning to falter at the sight of him suddenly so vulnerable.
Do you see the innkeep's son here now? The one who gave you the ale that night?
Lyanna looks about. She catches the innkeep's eye, but he looks quickly away again. She shakes her head.
No.
When I found you here, you were passed out on the bed in one of the rooms the innkeep let out to travellers. The innkeep's son was standing over you, one hand down his breeches. If Roderick had not been there to drag me away, I believe I wouldn't have stopped beating him until I felt his skull cave in beneath my fists.
You didn't...
Kill him? No. I would have. Then, or the next day, or whenever I got the opportunity. So I had Sir Roderick arrange passage for him across the narrow sea and promised never to let slip which port the ship was sailing to, no matter how hard I pressed.
Lyanna sits back in her chair, her eyes drifting to the stairs as she endeavours to reconcile her father's revelation with her own recollection of that night. Across the table, Rickard winces at the consequences of his words, wrought plain upon his daughter's pained expression.
You never told me any of that.
Nor ever planned to, because you're wrong to think I didn't learn something that night. When I saw you lying on that bed, utterly helpless, in that moment I learned the most important lesson of my life. No matter how hard you fight, you cannot keep your children safe from the world. All you can do is fight to make that world a safer place for your children. So that's exactly what I've been doing, and for a time I even held my own. But that time has long since passed, because winter is coming, and I'm not strong enough to fight alone anymore.
Look outside. Father, spring is almost here. Winter has come and gone.
There's always another winter, Lyanna. We only made it through this one because the Dornish had spare grain enough to sell. Next time we may not be so fortunate. I need to make us better prepared, Lyanna, and to do that I need alliances of surer bond than my coin can buy. I need influence of greater reach than my lordship can command. But what I need most of all, what I need more than anything, is for my daughter to trust me. You don't have to understand me, you don't have to forgive me, you don't even need to love me, just so long as you trust me. Do you think you can do that?
Lyanna looks into her father's earnest, imploring face for the longest moment of her life.
Does it really have to be an either-or?
Rickard smiles sadly at his daughter's gallows humour. He sits back in his chair and sighs wearily.
That's not a yes.
It's not a no.
Then it's good enough for now, I suppose.
The preceding podcast was entirely a work of fanfiction. It was unofficial, unaffiliated, and unauthorised. Neither the podcast, nor any individual involved in its production, is now, nor has ever been, in any way associated with HBO, Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin, or the Song of Ice and Fire book series. The podcast was, is now, and shall always be, entirely without profit. Neither the podcast directly, nor its makers indirectly, generate or receive any form of revenue or financial restitution that might otherwise accrue to the rightful copyright holders. The preceding podcast was entirely a work of fan fiction. We hope you enjoyed it.